So we so we are live for episode 2, and I'm going to send us over to live on Facebook now. It is preparing our preview.
And I will be watching for it on yours to share a watch party.
All right. And all right, I'm going to tag you.
I'm just sitting over here refreshing your Facebook page, seeing your beautiful smile on your profile picture.
Okay, and it's going to go public. I have to make sure I'm at the ready in case the volume is loud when I hop on. And we are live now.
Great.
Okay.
Hasn't popped up on your Facebook yet for me. Oh, yep, there it is. Let's see. I think I have to click on it. Oh, it's not giving me the option to host a watch party.
Oh. Good morning all to everyone who's joining us for episode 2 of the Extroverted Jen's Adventures of Jen and Jen. We are getting set up here, and Jennifer Pinson has started a watch party over on her page, or you can join us here on my page. And we hope that you will share in the comments as we go through this time together some of your favorite tools for self-awareness, some of your stories that you might want to share with us along the way. Jennifer and I had planned that we would have these Extroverted Jen Facebook Live sessions together on the first Thursday of the month. If you were with us back in May, we covered some of the joys of being an extrovert, embracing our extrovert side during COVID-19. And for June, we've been planning and sharing and talking about exploring self-awareness and what that has meant to both of us, some of our stories on our journey of self-awareness, as well as some of the tools that have been really helpful for us in getting to know our own selves better. And we actually had on that list one of the books, and that has been really helpful for me in understanding whiteness and privilege and my own biases, as well as the marginalization and oppression that are so rampant in our world, and the structural racism that our country was founded on, and that is even more timely than we had anticipated today. So we want to start there and just share with you all a little bit about our journeys and the tools that have been helpful for us and those that are going to continue to be helpful for us. And I think it starts, Jennifer and I were just talking, we've been on together for a while here, that our journeys are still evolving. And I think it's important to say as we start that neither of us is an expert on any of the topics we're going to be discussing and sharing with y'all today. And we fully acknowledge that. We want to, and we have some links we're going to be sharing with you. We want to share with you those voices who have informed us that we can amplify here. We also want to just openly acknowledge that we're not going to be perfect at this. And we're grateful for the opportunities that we have to continue to learning. And as Maya Angelou said, when we know better, to do better.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was sharing with Jen before we popped onto this that I feel like my journey, even in the last 2.5 years, has kind of set me up into a place of being able to feel more empathy and being more empathetic and being just more self-aware in general as we're going through everything that's going on in the world right now. And so I've really appreciated these conversations that I've had with Jen, and I am appreciating the opportunities to learn from everybody. And I'm really looking forward to just being able to talk about some of the things things in the last 2.5 years that that I've done that's kind of built me to this place that I am in my life at this point, and kind of the journey that I've had in healing, realizing, being my own self-aware of everything, that's going on. And then also just being able to use my voice and my actions and things like that to support, individuals, to support, Black colleagues and individuals, and just being able to be a part of this conversation.
Thanks, Jen. And we've been talking, Jen and I, together about some of those key moments throughout our own personal histories that have really influenced us and helped us to evolve and encouraged us to grow. And most of us know that growth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from those times that are uncomfortable and challenging. And for me, one of the biggest turning points in my understanding of whiteness and privilege and appropriation came from my experiences as a yoga teacher. And when I first started presenting about yoga and music therapy together, I'm really grateful that Jennifer Geiger connected me with Sangeeta Swami. And Sangeeta is now a dear friend and is someone who has really taught me to better understand the cultural appropriation that exists in many of our yoga practices here in the United States, and of ways that we can honor and respect the legacy that these mindfulness practices have come from without appropriating them. And so I'm going to share in the comments a couple of the resources that have been really helpful for me. I know I have a lot of friends in the yoga world as well. And so I'm going to pop into the comments here an article that was written, 8 signs to be able to tell if your yoga practice is appropriated. And then also the book, Cultural Intersections in Music Therapy. And one of the things Jennifer and I wanted to do is give a shout out to some of these resources that have been helpful. And so this is one, and don't look at the title because I have an early edition before they got the title corrected. That was edited by Annette Whitehead-Plow and Shuli Tan. I would say this is a must own if you're a music therapist listening to us today. It's called Cultural Intersections in Music Therapy, Music, Health, and the Person. And one of the pieces that this book really helped me to understand, in addition to diving deeper into understanding the cultures that many of my clients and friends and colleagues come from, is just an understanding of my own privilege. And Nicole Hanna talks about in this book how privilege are those areas that we don't even have to think about. Those are the areas where we know we are privileged. The example that she gives that resonated with me when I initially read it is, as a woman, choosing where I park when I'm in the city. I am very intentional with that. That's not something that my husband, who is a large white male, ever thinks about. And we're seeing more and more of these areas having a spotlight shown on them right now that we don't have to think about, particularly as white people in our world. We don't have to think about many of these areas of privilege. That's how we know they're privileged. Jen, do you want to share your story about that?
Yeah, so I feel like one of the biggest things that I've been doing here lately is just really being mindful of some of my white privilege and being mindful of some of those things. And I feel like that's one of the things that I can contribute right now, because like I told Jen earlier, is that here recently I've realized not being racist isn't enough. That, not being racist isn't enough to help other individuals, and it's not enough to show equality. And so, I've really taken the mindfulness in the last few days of realizing what more I can do to elevate voices and to really push for equality. And so part of that is like being very, very mindful of my own privileges. So a few nights ago, I was hanging out with a friend and we decided to go geocaching. And if you've never been geocaching, you're looking for like these small little pill bottles in random places, and you have a map that kind of tells you where you're going. And we found the first 3 pretty easily, and then got kind of hung up on the 4th one, and we decided to still go to the 5th one, even though it was 10 o'clock at night, or like 9:30. It was really dark out. And here we were in this hotel parking lot out by the dumpster looking for a geocache. And like I said, it was night. It was 9:30, 10ish, something like that. And I noticed somebody noticing us. And the white male that I was with as well, he noticed the person as well. And it was in that moment that I kind of hunched down next to him and I said, how privileged are we that we can be here in the middle of, the protesting, the rioting, the things going on, that we're able to be outside in this hotel, in the parking lot, in this dumpster, out by this dumpster, and no one's called the police on us. And we've been here for a little while. And it just kind of made me realize that, that's what white privilege is it's being able to do things like that without, the police being called without, and then even if the police got called, being white, well dressed, and things like that, the police's response to us probably would have been very, very different. And it was in that moment that I started kind of realizing, and I've also, been realizing some of the other things, like waking up in the morning and, the feelings that I felt about, not having friends being able to be streamable on, Fire Stick, and just how privileged I was that was one of the things that I woke up thinking about on a Friday morning through all of this, that was again, a part of being that white privilege. And so as we begin to continue to have these conversations and things like that, I'm so open to learning and just so open to evolving and so opening to growing myself in terms of that I realize that I can do more.
Yeah. And that is self-awareness is where we start, being able to recognize our privilege, to understand what it means and to feel it. And I know for me and Jen and I have talked, we're very empathetic people, and I know I have to put up healthy boundaries so that I don't take on everything. And this is a time when I think it's really important for us to feel some of that anxiety.
Yeah.
That talking with my friends and colleagues who are people of color, the anxiety that they live with. And part of our privilege is not experiencing that, except for these times when we can choose to, ooh, that's too much, I need to step back. We have that choice, and that in and of itself is a privilege. One of the books that really helped me to understand this as a white person, and the one that I had planned to share today, and I'm grateful to share again today, is White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. If you ever have the chance to hear her speak, she's a phenomenal speaker. I've put the link to her website in the chat there for you all, along with an awesome list of anti-racism resources. As Jen mentioned, both of us believe that it is not enough to be non-racist. We need to be anti-racist. And that list of resources includes books, podcasts, movies, lots of ways that you can engage, people to follow on Twitter, and Instagram, and all those things. And I learned a lot from this book about just how structural racism is, and really understanding what that means, and understanding that, we, as well as Jen's kids and my nieces and nephews, had a greater chance of living from the moment of birth because they are white.
Yeah. I have a comment on my watch party from a Black music therapist that I know and really adore, and am very thankful that she is a part of our conversation today. So Kiana says, in college, we were prepared ourselves for when our clients having differing views. We did not prepare ourselves on how to deal with it if our clients are prejudiced towards us. She's experienced discrimination from clients, one that we terminated, but the other we knew we had behavioral history of calling staff roommates and therapists the N-word. And I know being a part of, some of Kiana's journey as a music therapist and stuff, that she has experienced, racism inside of her work. And, as that's something I've never experienced other than secondhand. And so I can't imagine, the way that she did that she did feel, and the way that, that was.
Yeah. Thank you, Kiana, for sharing that. And music therapists who are listening, this is a call to action for us, right? Because not only are our colleagues and our friends experiencing this, our clients are experiencing this, and they're experiencing it from us. And one of the pieces that I know has been really important in my journey is understanding more about the cultural appropriation of instruments.
Absolutely.
And genres of music, and educating myself so that every instrument I bring into a music therapy room, and every instrument I use in my practice, I know its history. And I make sure that it's appropriate that I am the one playing it. And we have these conversations. There's some great resources out there if you are a therapist about how to engage in these conversations. I think they're so important. They really create a different environment because racism is so pervasive in our society. It is a part of life for our clients of color. It is a part of life. And if we're not addressing it, we are leaving out this huge part of their lives that they don't feel like they can bring into the therapy space. And one of the pieces that Jen and I have talked about, and we want to affirm, is we are not going to be perfect at this. That we are going to make mistakes. We'll probably make some in this live video. And one of the things I've learned over the years is to be grateful for the people who trust me enough to call me out when I make a mistake, to apologize, and then to do better.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
not to make it about me, right? Jen and I were talking about that. Not to do the white woman tears thing, but as Maya Angelou said, when we know better, do better.
one of the things that I've learned in the last, in myself, in my journey in the last two and a half years and stuff, is how to authentically apologize. And so one of the things that, that I've always been very kind of annoyed with, but before I actually say this, I would like to say something about Kiana first. So Kiana goes on to say, based on our conversations, that she wants to say that she held the positive or held positive regard for that individual, but it was also very difficult to go back knowing that individual used the N-word. And then she says that music therapists of color need to discuss how to manage our feelings when that's happening. So, but to kind of continue to that point is one of the things I realized is how to authentically apologize. And so that was something that in my past relationship, that was really hard, because oftentimes we'll say an apology like, I'm sorry about how that made you feel, but that's not a genuine apology. Apologizing for how somebody else feels is not taking ownership of your action. Yeah. And sometimes you may not understand why your action was hurtful to somebody. And so this is a very surface kind of example, but even if you say hello to somebody, but maybe you didn't make eye contact, or maybe you didn't use the right body language or something like that, and it offends the other person, or upsets somebody else, you having to kind of dive down deep and figure out, okay, so what was it that I did that could have possibly come off that might have offended, upset somebody. It doesn't necessarily mean that our actions were completely wrong or whatever, but if we want to genuinely learn and we want to genuinely do better, we have to understand why it hurt someone else. Was it our body language? Was it, how we said it? Was it the way that it was delivered? Things like that. And we're never going to make it perfect for everybody in the world. And we also understand that, things are going to happen, but it's really important that we continue that self-awareness, and we continue that part of figuring out why it is that we've done something that's maybe upset somebody else. Yeah. Especially if these are people that we care about and people that we want to, this is in every aspect of our lives. And so, if you're apologizing and you're making it about you, then I think it's a time to look really deep inside and kind of figure out, what is it? How can you authentically apologize without making it about yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jen. And we would invite you in the chat to share some of those resources that have been helpful for you. I'm going to add a couple more into the chat box for you all as we talk about this journey of self-awareness. One resource I'm adding into the chat is a list of Black-owned bookstores. And so for all y'all, as you're sharing those books, I know I have a stack over here. I'm really excited to delve into and using my Audible account to actually hear Black voices reading their stories, I think is also important. So one that I'm excited to delve into is Eloquent Rage is next on my list by Brittany Cooper. And I had recommended to me the Audible version of that so I could hear it. If you're ordering hard copies of books, I can't recommend enough checking out this list. And then I also posted a link to a whiteness discussion group. If this conversation that Jennifer and I are having today is something that you would like to be a part of, my dear friend Daniel Goldschmidt is putting together a whiteness discussion group. Daniel spoke about whiteness at our last year's national conference, which was again one of those key turning points I know in my journey. And for many of us who are present and a part of that experience. And we are going to be doing a discussion in that group on the book, Me and White Supremacy, Combat Racism, Change the World, and Become a Good Ancestor by Layla Said. So I would encourage you to check that form out if you're interested in being a part of that group as well. And Jen, thank you for sharing those experiences, and those of you who are hopping in the chat and sharing your experiences and your recommendations as well. Know that we appreciate that. I think in this journey of self-awareness, both Jen and I have talked about the importance of listening, the importance of using our privilege, and being aware, as Jen was talking about, that bias shows up in those little things. It shows up in our body language. It shows up in those instinctual responses that we have because of how our country was created, because of what we've been taught from the time we were little. And it's never too young to have these conversations. I've been sharing resources over on my Facebook page, which some of you are on right now, throughout the time about having these conversations with your kids. There's going to be, I just shared a link, there's going to be a Facebook Live event or a Zoom event held by some authors of children's books to have these discussions too. So for those of you out there who are wondering about this, it's something that we've been having discussions about. Some of you know we have daily fam jams in my family, and we've been having these conversations about bias and privilege and racism, and they're uncomfortable. And it is so important that we dive in and that we're not afraid to listen and learn. And so Denny, I see you sharing there. Oh, yes, that's also a great article too. 5 racist anti-racism responses good white women give to viral posts. We all have a lot to learn. And that for me was the piece with white fragility was so important, was understanding that as a white progressive, there's a lot of microaggressions that I do, even in my well-meaning ways, that cause harm. And being aware as a human being and as a music therapist that do no harm is my first rule.
Yeah. So one of the things in our practice that we're going to start implementing is some kids books that we can start using as singable stories within some of our some of our clients and stuff, to start teaching about equality and start teaching about books that illustrate people of color and also multicultural. And so that's one of the things as an agency that we're going to start turning and doing a little bit more of, is trying to incorporate more multicultural opportunities. I've read several stories from people of color and experiencing racism at young ages. And I really feel like some of that is just it's taught to young kids. And if we can use our voices and our opportunities as therapists to be illustrating, more people of color in our work, that's something that would go a long way in our community and in just all the work that we're doing. And so that's one of the things that we've looked into, and we've looked into some of the books and stuff that we can get and resources that we can start implementing in our therapy sessions now. So in hopes to help.
Thanks, Jen. That idea of amplifying voices is one that resonates with me. There's a poem by Mickey Scott Bay Jones that I've had in my therapy rooms for a long time, and I often use when I present. And I would love to share it with you all here today, and then use that as a turning point into some of these areas of self-awareness. If you don't follow Mickey Scott Bay Jones on Twitter, I highly encourage you to do so. She is the Justice Doula, and is an author and a speaker and a poet. And this is her invitation to brave space. Together, we will create brave space, because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we've all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Jen.
You're welcome. That has been my guiding poem for a long time, and especially during this time of trying to use my positions of power to amplify the voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. And Mickey Scott Bay Jones is also an Enneagram 1, which I was really excited to connect with her on. And she has written an article, a blog on decolonizing the Enneagram. And so I'm going to share some Enneagram resources in the comments here as we move into some of these other tools that Jen and I have used for self-awareness. The Enneagram is a huge one for me, and I really appreciate what Mickey Scott Bay Jones has written about decolonizing this tool, because we know that many of these quizzes and trainings that we're going to share with you today, there are cultural biases inherent because of who created them. Many of these tools, as we use them now, and we know the Enneagram has some past long history, murky history, and the current tools that we use, many of them have been created by white men. And that is true for many of the tools that we use, not only for our self-awareness, but in our educational system today. And it's really important as we look at the voices that we're listening to understand who they come from. Yay, Martha, I have another Enneagram 1 on there today. And so in my journey, the Enneagram has been a tool that's been really helpful in just understanding both my strengths and challenges, understanding the patterns that I fall into when I'm under stress, as well as the gifts that I bring. And Russ Hudson, who's one of the authors that talks a lot about this work, says that you have a type, but you are not your type. And really warns, and I would encourage all y'all out there too, we shouldn't be typing each other. This is a tool for our own self-awareness and growth and learning to integrate our mind and our body and our soul and our spirit. And if you're looking for a couple of other resources, if the Enneagram is something of interest to you, the first book that I dove into that I really loved is called The Enneagram Made Easy. And it is by Renee Barron and Elizabeth Weigel. And it is kind of a user-friendly guide to the Enneagram. If you want to dive deeper, some of the works by Don Riso and Russ Hudson are probably some of the most well-known works on this topic. And I've also included in that in the different links a couple of things that I think are really neat. Brene Brown recently did a podcast episode on the Enneagram, and that goes through all 9 types as well. And so that's fascinating. Sleeping at Last, if you're familiar with them on YouTube, have an entire playlist with a song for each type. And it's interesting not only to listen to the song for your type, but also to listen to the song for the type that you are when you're fully integrated. And then there's an Enneathought link. And that's something I get every day along with my daily meditations and devotions that I get from different authors. I have this little Enneathought, which is not just a warm fuzzy. It is often a call out on some of the personality patterns that I fall into, judging myself and others, to one, expecting myself to be perfect. Sometimes it's like, why don't you do the opposite of your personality pattern and just take the day as it comes? And I'm like, what? Or I'll say, what would happen if you didn't organize the entire day? And my husband will laughingly joke that the world would end. And we know that is not true. And it is those patterns of thought that have been really helpful for me to better understand. I also really appreciate the writings of Richard Rohr and the Center for Action and Contemplation. So I've included a few of those links. The Enneagram is one of my favorite tools that I've used to get to know myself. Both Jen and I have also learned a lot through the love languages. Jen, do you want to share a little bit about your journey with those?
Sure. Yeah. So I've talked a little bit, I think, in some of these platforms about the fact that I'm recently divorced. And so it's been, actually it's about a year ago at this point that I started my journey, actually 2 years ago that my husband and I, or my ex-husband and I had legally separated. And, you know, with love languages, one of the things early on in our early on when we started having problems in our marriage, we had both taken love languages. And what I realize now is that my needs are very different based on what needs are being fulfilled in my life and how my journey in my life has come. And so that was something early on when Jen and I started talking about doing this Adventures of Jen and Jen. It was even before we had a name. That was a conversation that she and I had about how, you know, our love languages and sometimes our personalities might change and sometimes things in our lives might shift and change based on what needs are being met and what needs are not being met. And so I found my love languages are different based on when I was in a relationship versus now that I'm single and like different needs are there. My love language has changed. And what's also was really, you know, kind of eye-opening for me too, is that my 16 personalities or Myers-Briggs changed as well. I'd always kind of been on a cusp of being an ENFJ versus being an ENFP. And as my personality began to change and as like I started creating better boundaries and doing some of this work on myself and like really, you know, standing more firm and building more confidence and kind of shifting and changing some of my mindsets, my personality type changed ever so slightly. I mean, I'm still me at my core and I'm still who I am. And, you know, and I'm still somebody who feels a lot of feelings and, you know, and I can talk all day about some of my personality types and stuff and some of the weaknesses that I have and some of my strengths. But it's interesting that as we begin to shift to change, so if you're somebody who's taken the Enneagram, which the Enneagram is very new to me. So, I think I've only taken the Enneagram maybe a few months ago, but as I begin to take some of these personality tests, as I've really grown a lot in the last 2 years, 2.5 years. I've grown a lot and learned a lot about myself. I've also realized that some of my personalities have shifted just ever so slightly. And my needs in a love language and my needs for that have shifted and changed a little bit as well.
And I think it's important to understand, as we mentioned earlier, that we are always evolving. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's a really good thing, right? And never be afraid. I can't remember who said that. Never be afraid to admit that you're wrong. It just means that you're wiser today than you were yesterday.
Oh, I love that.
And that includes in how we understand ourselves. And I think it's interesting too, to bring that cultural lens into all of this, and to be aware of not only how we understand ourselves, but also how we want to perceive ourselves and how others see us, and the role that that can play when we talk about some of these personality inventories, and even how we choose to respond to them. For those of us that have taken many of these, right? You kind of know what you should put for an answer, or what you want to put of how you want to be seen. And sometimes people will tell you with the Enneagram that you can tell your type because it's the one that you resist. That's your true type, because right? Because it's the truth is hard. And as we look at this work with whiteness and privilege and really doing the work of anti-racism, it's hard. Mm-hmm. This is work that we're doing. And many of us who have positions of privilege and power, it is an opportunity to do that work and to share that work, and to amplify the voices who are doing that work, and to do the pieces that we can with what we've been given. There's some interesting cultural biases that Mickey Scott Bay-Jones talks about in the Enneagram, that as a Black woman, for her, she was perceived as an 8, which is the challenger initially. And she talks about how many Black women are initially perceived as this 8, this challenger, the strong Black woman stereotype. There's also some information that I was reading that often mothers are perceived as 2s, which is the helper. Okay. And 2s will often subjugate their own needs for the needs of others, which is something that many mothers I know do on a daily basis. And so sometimes when mothers will take these quizzes, that's where they'll lean, just because that's how they have learned to be. And so I think it's really interesting, at least for me on this journey of getting to know myself, of really understanding not only who I am, the true essence of who I am, getting to better know that, and also understanding how that is evolving and growing and changing over time, and to allow for that, and to understand how my biases play a role, and how the perceptions of others of who I am play a role. The Myers-Briggs you're talking about, I am a strong ENFJ.
I know.
And
you told me before. This is why I get you so well.
I know. And what was really helpful for me is understanding the extrovert piece, which we play with here in the Extroverted Gens, but really being more a measure of where we get our energy. Mm-hmm. And my friend Daniel Goldschmidt, who has the whiteness group, if you're just joining us, there's a link to the whiteness discussion group that he's creating around the book Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saeed. So we're going to be delving into that. If you're just joining us, you can find that link in the comments. He coined the term for me, Genergy. Which is a real thing. And especially if you know me when I'm with y'all who give me energy, because there's that extrovert coming through. With those of you who know me when I'm with you, oh my gosh, it fills me. And there's times when there's not Genergy. And so learning to understand when that's authentic, when that is truly who I am, and when that is me trying to be who I'm perceived to be, I think is an important piece of this self-awareness journey too.
Agreed.
What other tools have been helpful for you, Jen, or whatever you're going to say?
Yeah. So one of the things that I was going to say is that, earlier when you were talking about your, like the judging and you wanting to change and not having a bunch of structure in your day, I think that kind of goes back into, one of the things we talked about earlier is that when we're growing, it makes us uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And so in the last couple of years and stuff, as I've been growing and stuff to kind of change some of the things about my life and make some big changes. And I'm super excited. I'm actually had an opportunity where I wrote a chapter in a book called Our First Class Life. And so I'm one of several co-authors kind of telling their story about that journey. And some of the big things I talk about is like boundaries and control and shame resilience. And, some of the things that I've learned that has helped me like better the quality of my life and kind of get out of some of the situations that I was in, and stop being such a people pleaser and stop putting everybody else's needs before my own, and like really realize that, you know, I'm a human being too, and my needs need to be met and my needs need to be fulfilled, and also really work on that confident piece for myself. And that's one of the things I talk about in that chapter as well. But one of the things I wanted to kind of talk about too is that control piece, and realizing that, you know, as somebody who's a strong type A, who's an extrovert and things like that, I have this need to like always want to kind of control everything and everything to kind of be my way in a sense. And having to realize, you know, kind of how that plays into the grand scheme of everything in the world, and also realizing how I can use that very purposefully, and I can use that, you know, to kind of, but that sometimes I have to like really check myself and make myself sit in the back seat and kind of, you know, really look at the world around me and stuff too, and really be, you know, mindful of some of those boundaries that I have to put in place as well. So just in my own journey and my own learning of some of those things, that's been very helpful, just to even as we're having these conversations, these really difficult, hard conversations, that has helped me realize, you know, what I can do and how I can elevate my own voice and in that sort. Just kind of knowing some of those things based on my personality and what my needs are.
Thank you, Jen. And I know both of us, when you mentioned that shame resiliency, I think that is such a huge piece. And I know both of us have found the work of Brene Brown really helpful. If you're, yeah, yes, a couple of my favorites, The Daring Greatly and Rising Strong, as well as, I don't have it out here, but The Gift of Imperfections. Brene Brown, by the way, is also a one. So for those ones who are listening, in her podcast episode, she talks about just the challenge of owning that. If you haven't checked out her books or her podcast, we would encourage you to do that. And her work on shame resiliency and her leadership, I think it's really important now, as always, to be aware of the role that plays in our lives.
Yeah, the book, I Thought It Was Just Me, is another really good one by her. That book is so powerful. I learned so much about shame resilience, and realized too that, you know, the stories that people tell and like what you see about people isn't always sometimes what we have. And I loved in that book where they talked about like the us days. How all of us are a part of an us and all of us are a part of a day, and that there's, you know, like we're all struggling with something, and that, you know, everybody has, you know, she has this list of stuff, and she's like, there's probably not a single person in the world who doesn't fall into one of these us or days, and how we like intrinsically in our mind create us and days, that it's like we group people together just in our mindsets. And talking about how when we're a part of the days, that's where that's when we start feeling those feelings of shame. You know, like for me, I'm a they because I'm divorced. I'm a they because I'm a single mom. I'm a they because of all of these different things that, you know, were just part of my journey and part of my life. And realizing, you know, where those days come in, and the fact that those days are where shame start to center, and then how to become shame resilient for those things. And for me, one of the things that's helped me become shame resilience is to just talk about it. For the longest time, I hid the fact that, you know, these were some of the things I was going through in my life. I hid the fact that, you know, the shame that I felt, you know, for being divorced or going through a divorce, the shame that I felt for some of the feelings that I talk about in my book about centered around my second pregnancy, and some of those feelings that came up. And, you know, so it's really important that we, you know, acknowledge those days and acknowledge the things that we begin to feel shame about, and that we talk about them, because not talking about them and not talking about those things is kind of what creates that shame in that day.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for us to also build an awareness of where those us's and they's come into, because that's a lot of times where the biases are.
Absolutely. I was actually going to add that if you didn't say it. So
yes.
It's
it's where many of them live without us even recognizing it. And so, you know, Jen and I are here just to encourage self-awareness today. I want to thank Martha Anderson for her comment that the challenge as white people will be to allow the space for other voices. And just want to share with you that Jen and I had a conversation about whether or not to do this Facebook Live today. And we were already planning, way back when we planned this, to talk about self-awareness, and whiteness was one of the pieces we were planning to talk about. And we chose to use this position of power and privilege to share a little of our journey today. And we want you to know that both of us are committed to anti-racism, and we are committed to amplifying other voices. And so we would encourage you to put in the comments resources, people you think we should be following, people whose voices you would like to amplify today. I've been sharing a lot of those on my Facebook page as well as on Twitter and Instagram, and will continue to do so, as well as continuing to advocate in all the positions of power and privilege that I have to do what I can do. And I think that's really important. The other piece, Jen, that you talked about that I think we need to mention is that importance of boundaries and self-care. And y'all know that I love self-care. And I want you to just acknowledge that this is an area where I'm continuing to learn and grow. It was just within the last few months that I learned, because I've always quoted Maslow and talked about the hierarchy of needs. And it was just in the last few months that I learned that those concepts that Maslow is famous for actually came from the work he did with the Blackfoot Reservation in Alberta, Canada. And so those are ideas that were taken from Indigenous peoples who don't get the credit for them. And so now when I present and use that position of privilege and power, I give the credit to the Blackfoot tribe in Alberta, Canada, and what they've given us in understanding that hierarchy of needs. Because when Maslow went up there and spent time with them, he couldn't understand why the way they were living was so different than what he saw in his own society. And so I think it's really important that we are aware, that we continue to increase our awareness, and that we use that power and that privilege. And that we also, I talked a little earlier about the importance of allowing us to feel some of this anxiety, to feel that, because it's what so many people feel all the time. And we also know, and Audre Lorde said this, or Audre Lorde said, who's, if you haven't followed her work, was an incredible author and speaker. And she famously said that self-care is both an act of self-preservation and political warfare. And I love that, because this journey of self-awareness, and in our world, this journey of reparation and dismantling structural racism is not a sprint. This is a marathon, and we need to be caring for ourselves. We need to be continuing to step into the discomfort, to do what we can, and to listen, and to amplify the voices that are out there doing this, and the voices who are really good at this, who've been doing this work for a lot longer than we have. And both Jen and I are grateful for the people that we've gotten to learn from along the way, and the people that we'll continue to learn from too.
So true. Thank you so much for this conversation today, Jen. I'm glad that we had this scheduled and that we could have these conversations. And I'm appreciative of all the people that have chimed in today. And, again, like Jen had said, put resources in the comments and let's all learn together, and really, do better.
Absolutely. We plan to continue doing this Extroverted Jen's Adventures of Jen and Jen on the first Thursday of the month, and hope you will continue to share that journey with us. The next time that we are together, we're going to be delving into some of the challenges, I believe, of being extroverts in this time, and as well as continuing some of these conversations that we've started today, because for us, and we know for many of you, this is an ongoing journey. Do you have something that you want to add, Jen?
Yes, I just want to share one thing that Kiana says is wounds literally itch while healing. Growth cannot occur without healing. And I just thought that was powerful. And then she goes on to thank us for having this conversation. But I just really wanted to share those first couple lines, because I think that's so right, and I love that, we all have wounds from, whatever it be in our own lives. And, they literally itch. And so I think that's an important analogy and something to think about.
It is. So we would invite you to continue to step into the discomfort with us, and to continue growing and learning about yourselves, to continue to grow and learn about each other, and what we can do to truly live out what it means to be anti-racist, to truly live out what it means to amplify the voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We are still learning and growing in this process, and we really appreciate your being along for that journey with us. And we will look forward to seeing more resources and comments shared as y'all listen to this. And we will look forward to continuing the conversation in other areas as well, and to having the opportunity to listen in other areas too.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Take care, everybody. Be safe, be well, and we'll look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thank you.